Welcome. This portion of the video is being shot with the Canon SX70 in a very cold day in New York City. If you're interested in buying this camera, or if you just stopped by because you want to learn a little more about this intriguing super zoom bridge camera, you've come to the right place. We're going to go into a lot of specifics on this camera. It's a full review, all the features, details, but you're going to see a lot of examples, a lot of video examples, a lot of photos, and examples on how to use the camera in real-world situations.
The Canon SX70 is the successor to the SX60. It has a 20 megapixel 1/2.3 inch size CMOS sensor. It uses different batteries than the SX60, so if you have some of those old batteries, you're out of luck. The camera is small though and compact, weighing in at just over 1 1/3 pounds. It has a fully articulating LCD screen and yes, a nice dedicated battery charger, so you're not relegated to that USB cable to charge. Its most prominent feature is its 65 times zoom, and with it, well, you'll feel like you could be sitting in first class. Although it's not as powerful a zoom as the 3000mm zoom on the Nikon P1000, which I reviewed, and with that zoom, you can get a shot like this.
You expect me to believe that?
No, but I expect you to believe that it can go from really wide to really tight in a hurry, from 21mm to 1365mm equivalent in a couple of seconds, and that's the advantage of a small sensor. It would seem this would be a perfect camera for wildlife and birding, but being in the city, this is about the best I can do for wildlife and birding. A bunch of pigeons sitting on a ledge through a dirty window. That's full zoom. Let's take a look at how the lens does in video at various focal lengths.
2 times. 4.1 times. 8.5 times. 11 times. 19 times. 65 times. You should be feeling really patriotic now. This flag represents freedom, and you can see the freedom that this zoom gives you. Oh man, I know, that was really bad. Sorry about that. But let's move on here. Speaking of flags, there's no more flags than at the United Nations. And let's take a look in photo mode how we can zero in on one of those flags. Any idea which country that's from? I sure don't know.
This is my country of Kazakhstan.
The camera lets you shoot in RAW or compressed RAW and JPEG with a variety of image sizes and proportions. Can the SX70 perform swimmingly with water shots, or will there be some foul play? Next, we're going to take a look at some shots in photos of the various focal ranges of this f3.4 to 6.5 lens, and you can see in bright sunny conditions the image stays sharp even at maximum telephoto where you can see a lot of detail. I managed to do a little more birding here as this 1365mm lens finds a bird on top of that building, and here again is the power of that lens as I show you various focal lengths of this guy who's really decided to get on his high horse.
So the zoom range of the camera is 21mm on the wide side, 1365mm zoomed in all the way. But be careful what you read. Now, what do I mean by that? That is true when you're in photo mode, when you're taking pictures. But once you go into video mode, all that changes. The image crops in HD video mode and crops in even further in 4K video. So what this means is, if you're going to use this camera to shoot video, number one, you're not going to get that super wide angle that you do in photo mode. That may or may not be an issue for you. But on the good side, it means you're going to get a lot tighter in video mode than the 1365, especially in 4K. It's a lot more of a zoom. So to answer the question that we posed at the beginning, is this camera a super zoom? It's starting to look like it is.
Normally when a camera has both HD and 4K video, I usually opt for the 4K video mode. But in this camera, I may think a little differently, and it's not just because of the heavy crop in 4K. Also, I don't see a really big difference between 4K video sharpness and HD video sharpness, and you'll see some examples of that. And sometimes the HD just seems less jittery. There's no bones about it.
The camera is really nice and compact, and it feels good in the hand. The grip is comfortable, so you have a nice grasp on it, and it's really light too.
Don't assume like I did that this rib control in front controls focus or something, because it actually does nothing. But surprise, the zoom rocker switch is variable speed, slow or fast. You also get another zoom control on the side.
Holy smoke!
The 3-inch LCD screen fully articulates, and the EVF is a nice upgrade from the SX70, more than doubling the resolution, and it shows. It's clear, bright, and sharp, with lots of information on screen. But don't let that intimidate you. The camera is really easy to use. It's a point-and-shoot camera, and it really is a piece of cake. When they say something is for the birds, it's not usually a compliment. But this camera really is made for the birds.
I hope they don't go to the bathroom on me.
Oh shit!
Is this like an Alfred Hitchcock movie? I don't know.
Up in the sky! It's a bird!
It's a plane!
No, it's just the Canon SX70 capturing all the action.
Uh-oh. This one here sees his family coming home and is like, okay, let me join them. These guys are skating on thin ice. Now this is stabilization with 4K. Very chatty. It must feel good walking on water. And this is 4K, and we're going to switch to HD.
So hopefully this scene gives you an idea of what I meant earlier by the difference between HD and 4K. HD almost seems as sharp as 4K, which isn't typical for most cameras. And it also seems to be a little more stable when you're zoomed in. Again, possibly because it doesn't get in quite as tight.
And we're going to go back to full wide. Now, this is at full wide in 4K for vlogging, but I will tell you that one of the big problems is the record button is all the way around the back. So there's no easy way to press the record button, so you can't even see it. So just for that reason alone, it's not a great vlogging camera, and I can see that the wide angle isn't quite that wide. My arm is really fully extended. Let's try HD. Now I can see right away the wide angle is so much wider here in HD. This is definitely
more practical.
When you have your camera set to movie recording and you set 4K video, it will shoot 4K video when you're in the movie recording mode. But that's it. If you're in any other mode, like picture mode or the shutter priority or aperture priority mode, and you press that movie button, the movie is going to be in an HD mode, whatever you designate in the menu. So be very careful about this. If you're thinking you're shooting in 4K or you want to shoot in 4K, make sure you're in the movie mode or else you're going to have an HD video. I was really scratching my head for a while about this, not understanding what I was doing wrong, because it's not really explained anywhere, or at least anywhere I could find.
Shooting the moon. How about during the day? This is in HD mode. There we go, 65 times. But of course, the moon is made to be seen at night, and here it is in 1080p with the Canon SX70, and here it is even closer in 4K. The zoom is so tight, we have to even push it back a little bit to get the entire moon in the frame. I gotta zoom back out a little bit. Actually 56 times. You can't quite see Neil Armstrong, but it's not bad for a $600 bridge camera. But most of the time you'll probably be using the camera during the day, and it does very well in both wide angle and zoom, and the sun sparkles here look very nice off the water. Here you can see the sun flare and glare and how the lens handles that. You be the judge if you think this looks good. Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comment section about how these videos look. Now this poor guy doesn't have time to leave any thoughts in the comment section as he's too busy getting the snow off his car. Well gee, take a look. He can barely see out of his glasses, all fogged up from his mask. Here the camera's autofocus does a pretty good job of keeping things in focus, but it's when the lights go down is when the problems begin. It seems when the light level drops to a certain threshold, the grain really starts to kick up, as you can see here. It's not even nighttime, and it's very grainy and noisy. And take a look at this image. I'm going to show you a comparison to the Nikon P1000, which also has a small sensor, which I did a review on. And here is footage from that camera, and it's a lot cleaner and less grainy. But both cameras did have a lot of trouble autofocusing. Fortunately, the camera gives you an option in the menu to set a maximum for your ISO, and I choose 400 because the image looks a lot better. Here zoomed in, you can see minimal grain, but the camera would prefer to go to 3200 if it was set to auto, and you can see how soft and noisy the image is. You know all those signs you read by the lake? Please don't feed the birds bread, it's not good for them. Well, apparently somebody didn't read those signs, because here we have this poor bird struggling on this piece of bread, and let's see if he can actually ingest it. The SX70 with its long zoom will be able to let us know, because otherwise we would not be able to see this happening. And it looks like this bird, maybe he's given up. No, look at that, the bird actually did it. Now this footage was shot in 4K at full telephoto, and now we're pushing back so you can once again get an idea of that tremendous range from 21 to 1365. So when the lights get really low, like at night, the autofocus becomes just about useless. So you need to know about manual focus, which is a bit awkward to use, but you hit the manual focus bar and then you use the up and down pad on the wheel to change the focus. It's kind of awkward, but you do get the hang of it. So there's a soccer field or some sort of field all the way in the distance. Let's see if the Canon can pick it up. Autofocus is having trouble. This is at full zoom. Future Pele's, I don't know. But pretty cool how we can pick up what's going on a soccer field pretty far in the distance. Now there is a quick way to get into manual focus. Half press the shutter button and on the circular pad on the back, hit the left button and it'll immediately jump you into manual focus mode, saving you a few steps. The top button near the side zoom lever is an interesting tracking focus mode. So if you decide on what part of the body you want to keep in the frame, you can actually designate that. Like for example here, the face, it'll zoom in and out on the face, keeping it in the frame, or the upper body, or the whole body, and then you can see it actually does work. And it will track it for you. Yes, this is a point and shoot camera, but you still have control if you want over aperture, shutter speed, or even full manual control with the top dial. There is also a built-in flash which you manually raise. The camera supports high-speed burst shooting up to 10 frames per second. Now in Canon's product video, they make it seem pretty easy to take an extreme close-up and keep it in focus. Can a layperson do that without a problem? Let's ask a layperson.
How does it feel to be a layperson?
A layperson?
Mm-hmm.
What did you just call me?
So here she is, and here I am, and here the Canon SX70 is. So she is going to take some photos of me at full zoom, or pretty close to full zoom, to see if she can hold the camera steady. She's not experienced, so if you have someone in your family who is not that experienced, this will be a good test. And you can see that, well, besides the subject matter, the photos themselves actually came out pretty well. There were a couple of misfocuses in the group, but most of them actually came out looking pretty acceptable. How about some more photo and video examples? What I noticed on a fair amount of my shots, especially the ones at the extreme zoom range, it wasn't razor sharp, just looked a little soft and a little noisy, so maybe don't always shoot at the full 65 times. Sorry, but this really reminds me of a classic scene from the movie Naked Gun.
I decided to return to the hospital with Ludwig's shipping records to see if I could.
This was shot in 4K at full tele, but also manual focus because of the time of the day was getting dark and the camera was just not focusing in on the helicopter. It was a lot of hunting. But look at this zoom range. This is walking in 4K. Now we're going to walk in HD. Walking in HD. With such a long zoom, stabilization is of real importance, and there's 3 levels of stabilization. Let's take a look at the low level of stabilization in 4K. I am hand holding this so you get an idea. This is standard. And you can see that it crops in a little bit. Is it really more steady? Not so sure. You're going to have to be the judge. And now we're going into the highest stabilization level, and you can see there's some autofocus issues, and it actually looks less stable because it's so tight. The maximum reach in HD is considerably less, as you can see, but it also looks more steady because it's not as tight. I would say the one big disappointment about this camera for me is the image stabilization. I've seen Canon do a better job with their other cameras, and this being a small sensor, it should be easier to stabilize the sensor, but there is a bit of a jitter and sort of a shakiness to the image even when stabilized. So try to use a tripod if you're going to use really long zooms.
So one of the nice things about this camera is the incredibly wide 21mm lens on the wide end, which is wider than a 24mm, which is considered the standard wide-angle lens for a lot of cameras. But let's just take a look and see how 21 compares to 24. And we'll use the Sony XV400, which is a similar super zoom camera, which has the maximum wide angle of 24mm. So let's see how it compares.
Want to go wider than 21 millimeters? Well, you can with panorama mode. Now, I'm very skeptical of these gimmicky modes, but in this particular camera, look at this, it actually looks pretty good compared to the 21 millimeters, and depending on how far you sweep it along, you can really go wide, and it actually is pretty useful, except if there's motion, because take a look at this. But don't discount it for a lot of situations. This versus this. If you had a wide-angle lens this wide, there'd be a lot of distortion in the buildings. If you want that fisheye look, the camera does offer that in its digital effects section, and there are a lot of other hokey effects. Now, this $600 Super Zoom also offers you the option of doing time-lapse, and you have a lot of creative control of how you set up the time-lapse. You can see at the gray bar there, it tells you how long you'll be shooting, 16 minutes and 27 seconds, to produce a 12-second final result. And you can also set if the time-lapse is going to be shooting in 4K or HD. Another feature in the bag of tricks is the macro function. I am really close. And it's still in focus. Wow. Another nice touch is the mic input that the camera offers to give you more creative control. So I have this wireless microphone. This is the receiver portion. And goes nicely into the microphone port, but being that there's no hot shoe, we just leave it like that. Isn't that pretty? Okay, so despite the clumsy nature of the setup, it's still kind of nice that the Canon does have a microphone input, so we can do shoots like this, and the flip-out screen does work with the camera mounted nicely on a tripod. One of the problems, though, not only is that there is no hot shoe, but there's also no headphone jack to be able to monitor the audio to make sure it's coming out. And also, when you start recording, that audio level display goes away as well. So it would be nice to see the audio monitors while you're recording, but I guess I'm nitpicking. Again, this is a $600 consumer camera, so kudos for Canon for at least including a microphone jack. Maybe the SX70 will have a hot shoe as well. Now I can see right away the wide angle is so much wider here in HD.
Even though there is no headphone output, when you play back the files, you can hear the sound through a little speaker on the camera, which I didn't even realize it had till I just did this test right now. So that sort of makes up for the headphone jack a bit. So this is a nice bright outdoor scene with the sun shining on my face. And to get an idea about dynamic range and how it handles highlights, let's take a look at this scene versus a full frame camera on the same scene, the Sony Alpha 1. Both cameras pointed at me, shooting right now. And by the way, that Alpha 1, that $6,500 Alpha 1, does not have a flip out screen, which the Canon does. Okay, I just took out the wireless mic, so now this is the mic from the camera itself, so you can get an idea about audio quality. There are times you may want to use the built-in microphone. Now I'll go behind the camera so you can hear, if you're narrating, what it sounds like. This is the sound of a narrator behind the camera, so you can get an idea if you're narrating your home movies or soccer games. A little nitpick I have with this camera is that if you're shooting on a tripod, doing some birding or shooting some wildlife, and you want to swap out the SD card, unfortunately they put the SD card in the same door as the battery at the bottom. So if you have a quick release plate on the tripod, you got to unscrew it, take it off. It takes up time and it's frustrating. The more modern cameras have the SD card slot on a door on the side, so it makes it much easier to swap it out.
Try not to fall into the trap of always zooming in 100% full zoom. It's not always necessary, and oftentimes the footage might look like this due to atmospheric distortion.
So is this camera for you? Well, if you're doing wildlife or birding, then it's really a no-brainer. The 65 times zoom, which gets you in so tight, is perfect for wildlife or birding. And as I showed you, it's really more than 65 times if you're using video mode. And even more than that, because the stabilization does increase it as well. So you really have tremendous flexibility. With the ultra wide angle lens, you can still use this for travel photography. You don't have to worry about changing lenses lenses, you have one small compact camera to carry around. Now, if you're doing portrait or fashion photography, I'm not sure this is the right choice because that small sensor is really not going to give you the depth of field that you need. The small sensor also is going to affect you in low light conditions. So if you're going to be doing a lot of your shooting in less than optimal conditions, your footage is going to get grainy and your autofocus is going to suffer too. So if that's going to bother you, then you might be disappointed. But if that's really not a concern, if most of your footage is going to be outside, which a lot of people are going to use the camera in outdoor conditions, then I definitely give you the green light. Please be sure to check out some of my other videos on the SX70. One where I go into real detail on the menus, dials, and controls, get down and dirty into the specifics of the camera and some nice tips and tricks, which I think you'll find helpful. I also, in another video, take the camera to the streets of New York and do a lot of photos and videos, and some corny jokes are thrown in there as well, if that's your thing. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like, it helps the channel, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.